Morning. Good morning.
That is a really nice NERSA hello. We have over 200 people.
Pam, you need to unmute.
Put me on mute again. Okay, I'm back. So good morning, welcome. I was saying we have about 200 people registered for this event. It's fabulous to see everyone turn out to get through some important topics today. Assuming there's continued interest, we are planning to offer this on a weekly basis, as long as you all need to get together and chat with one another. Here with me today. They're going to be responding to your different questions, providing some of their stories about what's evolved on their campuses. Here on the West Coast, we do feel like we're a little bit on the front lines of this in terms of a timeline, with it hitting Seattle first, at least in terms of the US. And we realize that everyone's really at a different place in this around the country. I think that's been one of the most fascinating things to me, is to watch this unfold on a very different timeline and in a very different way as we move around the country. But that said, as always, there's a lot to learn from one another, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I said, Leah Hall-Dorothy is currently serving as our NERSA president. She's also the executive director of recreation at Oregon State University. I think many of you know Leah. We also have Alex Aceta, who's the director of recreation at Stanford University. Recently there, he was at Portland State for a while, and also serving as NERSA at-large director this year on the board. I'll turn it over to them in just a minute. This session is being recorded. We'll post it on the website. Yesterday, we launched a new area of the website, nersa.net/motion. That'll take you to all these virtual roundtables and link off to other COVID-19 resources. So as we go through this is just a Zoom meeting. Please keep yourself muted unless you're talking. Erin will also keep an eye out for those, and she may mute you if you forget to mute yourself. We are going to actively use the chat box here. So hopefully down at the bottom you can see the icon for the chat. Go ahead and click it. Type in your questions. If you have ideas or comments you want to contribute, go ahead and put something in there in the chat box. I'll be watching that and surfacing questions, and also calling on others besides Leah and Alex to share their ideas. And then of course there's always NERSA Connect to connect in between these video sessions. Just a couple quick guidelines. As I said, everybody is in a different place around this across the US. The decisions to close or not close, how we're handling the different ways to close, how that's impacting student staff, where our universities are at in terms of their decision making and their policies. Everyone might be in a different place. So we just need to have a healthy level of respect for that. We are going to focus on our role as higher education professionals. We're not going to give medical advice. We're not going to try and act like the CDC. And we're not going to use this space to talk about any opinions we might have about politics or the government response in this. This, of course, is a no judgment space. This is a long-standing tenet in NERSA, one of the great parts of NERSA culture. Please, feel free to be honest and vulnerable and ask your questions. Again, no matter where your university is at in terms of planning or having things figured out. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing my screen, which means it's going to look like the Brady Bunch here in a minute.
Oh my gosh.
So Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you. It's maybe one of the first universities other than University of Washington to close. Maybe you can give us a couple minutes on what your experience has been so far.
Yeah, thanks, Pam, and thanks everybody. I was scrolling through all of your lovely faces, and this is like the biggest session ever that I presented to at NERSA, and I'm so glad to see some of our colleagues being willing to collaborate and share information, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you're all doing too, because I've been scrounging everybody's website trying to see what everybody's up to. So as Pam said, we were along with the University of Washington, probably the two schools to, well, I think we might have been actually the first one to close. University of Washington was one of the first schools to send all their students home. Stanford was very quickly behind them. We had been working for about 2 days to get ready to do a dramatic reduction in our hours as like many of you, people think of gyms as dirty and spreading of germs, and we know that we actually keep them cleaner than most places on campus. But the perception is that they're not as clean as people would like them to be, even though I know that's not really true. So we've been working for 2 days. I was getting ready to send a 27,000 person email out. It worked all day on it. It was 5:15 and I was walking around our rec center, just checking in on our staff, everybody was doing, and my boss called. I was like, oh no, this is not good. And sure as heck at 5:15, he said, you know, we've had a call to provost and we need to close all the rec centers and get everybody out by 6 o'clock. We're gonna do a press release at 6 because we've had another student test positive and we're going into shutdown mode. And so immediately I run 5 different buildings essentially. So we had to kick everybody out of all 5 of our buildings that are spread out over about 5 miles at various places around the Stanford campus. And so that was a lot. It was a lot for our members. It was a lot for our staff. It felt like a panic. We had people coming in asking what was going on, had our members tested positive, had we tested positive, and it was a little, I don't want to say scary, but it definitely created a little bit of tension for both our staff and our students and our faculty, because of course word of mouth starts spreading. At 6 o'clock that evening, about 6:05, our president sent out a message, who I think has done a pretty good job staying in touch with everybody, sent out a message about what the university's approach was. And so I think that we're very grateful for that, because it sort of calmed everybody back down to say, you know, this is coming, but we're getting into this business. You know, whether we call it social distancing or physical distancing, I think there's a handful of people trying to change it to physical distancing. But it gave context for why the university was doing the decisions that they needed to do. And so that was on a Friday night, so that gave us the weekend. I think that was a Friday night, geez, I don't know, it's all blurring together, I'm sure, like many of you. But that gave us time to start thinking about how are we going to respond and what were our responsibilities. And so I feel like we've had a couple more days to think about that. So that led to a small cohort sort of in the Bay Area. Shani from UCSF started an email chain, and Janice was on there from Santa Clara. And we added, I think I added maybe Matt from UW and a couple others who are already closed. And so then we started already brainstorming, what are you doing? You know, San Francisco State, what are you doing? How are you guys doing this? And then we realized that this was gonna happen. We just sort of saw it. So we started that shared doc that a lot of you have been contributing to, and started trying to think about what are we gonna do on Monday? How are we gonna take care of our full-time staff? Are we gonna get paid? How are we gonna take care of our part-time staff? Are they gonna get paid? Are we expected to do anything? What's our programming look like? And then how do we start supporting our staff emotionally as well through this? And then I'll hand it over to Leah here to tell her story, because Leah and I were emailing back and forth about it, how she had sort of a different experience on how her rec center closure went down. So Leah, over to you.
Thanks. All right. I'm on mute. Okay. Thanks, Alex. Thanks for throwing it over. Actually, too, in the chat box, if anybody is still open, throw that up in the chat box. Or if you just want to put a little bit about where you are now, in how long you've been closed, that type of thing. That'll help to, everybody can kind of see where each of us are in this timeline that Alex started. We actually wanted to close because we were unable to keep up with the cleaning because of heading into spring break. We're on quarters, which is a lot different than a lot of the country. So we were actually in dead week, and a lot of students didn't want to come to work. I was actually pushing to close, and our administration was, you're staying open as long as you possibly can. And so that was a stressful week of actually about 4 or 5 of us running the entire building, because we didn't want to put our student staff in that position. The university had already told all full-time staff to go to remote work, but students had to come to work. So that was a huge, internal struggle of how can I ask my students to come to work when I'm telling my full-time staff to go home and be safe. So it was a struggle of a week. So if anybody else is in that position, just go ahead and shoot me an email and we can chat. But we are now closed. We just closed on Thursday. So we are now going through the process of moving to remote, which I had asked my staff to do that 3 weeks ago. So we're actually 3 weeks into planning remote delivery, but now we're at the point of reduced funding. And also we want to be able to take care of our students. Can we still pay them at some level for remote work? Can we do average number of hours to get them through their term and still pay them? I don't want our budget reduction to be because I don't pay students, but I continue to pay staff to work from home. And in some cases, I'm big questions of, is that really 40 hours work that you're doing from home? And then I'm asking to not pay my students. So a lot of, I would say, internal struggles for our team on how we are treating students and how we're treating staff. And then also coming to a decision on what does remote work look like. So that's a lot of topics all in one place right there. So I would like to know maybe if somebody wants to say, where do you want to start? Or Pam, have you seen in the chat?
We're seeing a lot of good questions and responses around student employment and paying student employees, and can you do that, and how do you do that? And so actually I'm going to ask Max Miller, and Max, if you'll introduce yourself, say what school you're from, remind us if that's a public or a private institution, and then talk about how you're dealing with student pay. You had a nice explanation there in the chat.
Max Miller, Swarthmore College, small private liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia. We were on spring break when our president announced that the college will be moving to remote learning through April 3rd, and then an extended spring break was pushed. And then in the middle of that week, which was last week, the president announced that we're going to be moving to remote learning through the rest of the semester. Yesterday, the college came out with a statement with regard to student employment. I put that in the chat. I was not on the committee that was working on this, but I can refer you to who to contact if you do have specific questions. There's a full resource page with FAQ that I'll also put in the chat in case anybody has questions. That's specific to individuals who are work aided. Individuals who are not work aided will not receive that average base pay average for the remainder of the semester. And individuals who are in residential positions are not included in the calculation, and those payments are made in a full stipend at the beginning of each semester, so they will continue to have their retain that stipend.
Thanks, Max. Leo, are you far enough along in your decisions? I'd like to hear from maybe a mid to large size public school, how you're dealing with payments to student employees.
We aren't, Pam. We're still working on that, negotiating that. That's what took up most of yesterday. Right now, somebody else might be able to speak to it, but administration is not worried about that at the moment, but all of student affairs has taken that pretty seriously and moving it forward. Somebody else dealing with that?
I was going to offer, so Ian Brown, I think from Texas A&M at Kingsville, there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat about this, how are we paying people? And he started a survey where he's been able to quantify how many people are doing it, and then he can share the results of that so people can see sort of where it is. In looking at it, it looks like it is all over the map, right? There's no one, there doesn't seem to be one area doing more than the other. Some are paying, some aren't. People are obviously getting pretty clear about federal work study being able to continue. I think I found that out from Bill Calendar, but it looks like there's a whole bunch of other people that have figured that out as well. So if you get a chance on the shared Google Doc, Ian's work is pretty good, and it might help you place your school in context so that as you're trying to advocate for your students and your part-time staff, there might be some good data there to share with your administration.
Is Tony from Colorado on the call? Because he actually had some really good information he posted in the Pac-12 directors string. Maybe not, since I don't hear him.
Laura Hall from Penn State, why don't you go ahead and share what you're doing with regard to this? And one note for everyone, the recording will be posted, the transcript of the chat will also be posted. And so all these great resources everyone is sharing, that'll be made available on the website after today.
I'm happy to share, Pam. Laura Hall from Penn State University. We have roughly 1,000 student employees. Beginning this past Monday, we stood up a framework for students to be able to earn their scheduled wages via engaging in LinkedIn Learning seminars and student development opportunities. Our staff last week spent the week vetting different options for those LinkedIn Learning sessions, and then we're able to time them. We're trusting students to report their time accurately. We've communicated that with them. Obviously, there's potential for some challenges, but we're trusting that people will engage in this, the intent it was offered. And so we have had more than 120 students engage in that this week. We started with a pilot with students who self-reported a need for immediate earning of wages. And on Friday, we will roll it out to all of our student staff. We were closed for a week before we were able to engage in this. So we're also letting students in financial need make up the hours that they lost. It looks like many other units within the university that have the resources to do so are using this model. So that's one option. And then also, which I think a lot of us are already doing as well, is continuing to engage students in their typical jobs that are able to be done remotely. Student staff, fitness instructors, creating videos, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Laura. Why don't we shift the conversation a little bit to professional staff? Are you generally able to continue to pay professional staff? What does remote work look like? How are you ensuring, are you worrying about 40 hours? Are you just managing to outcomes? Alex, do you want to kick us off with a couple comments on that?
Sure. We, yeah, right. It's so interesting, all of our ethical compasses on this. We're at Stanford, they've agreed to pay our full-time staff. There was a sort of disclaimer, you know, a gentle one for like, for the time being, I think was something like that. But yeah, we've been very, very lucky to be able to continue that. And I was watching the chat, and Keith Wenrich from University of Georgia, he had mentioned something about how their fees had been refunded 46% of the student fee and suspended all payroll deduction. I was wondering if he had heard anything from the University of Georgia and how they were handling that. I know Matt at University of Washington is pretty nervous about that also, the reduction in student fees and somehow impacting the ability to pay full-time staff. So I don't know if Keith is on here and if you've talked about that at Georgia. Maybe not.
Keith, do you want to comment on that?
So maybe somebody else might be interested in chiming in on what they're doing on their campuses. Are there any campuses that have had different answers for full-time staff?
I just got unmuted.
There we go. Thank you.
At UGA, we did refund 46% of our student fees back to the students, but we also are only charging our students $15 a semester. We've been asked to freeze all of our budgets. As of last week, we had about $100,000 we were going to do on renovations, and we have to hold all that back. We are not paying our students at Georgia because they're not working, and we don't have funds to pay that. So we're just hoping to get through June 30th so we can keep everybody going and paying on our professional staff, which we will have the funds to do. But right now we are freezing every bit of budget that we can to make sure we can get to June 30th.
Is anyone else refunding fees, or it's under discussion to refund fees for the spring term?
Yes, we are at UMB here in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We're considering about refunding, and unfortunately, one of the challenges, the system that we're using is the Fusion software, which had a hard time to refund or keep the credit. But if we keep the credit for future registration purposes, it will not be applied to online, because online it is not available to access their credit unless you come in person, where our staff will assist you in that way. So we're going through some of the challenges and trying to work out the ways there. Interesting to see those notes that, thanks Pam, that you're going to share that chat information after that. So there's too many questions that just can't skim through that. Anyway, that's all my from UMB.
Yeah, and Kate, do you want to say a little bit more? I see your question here in the chat about CSU has ruled that all 23 campuses will not be refunding fees. However, they're asking each campus to provide language and justify this to the students. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So our system is comprised of 23 public universities. Sacramento State has about 31,000 students. And so within the CSU, they basically ruled that these mandatory campus fees that were student service center fees, rec center fees, union fees would not be refunded to the students. So as you can imagine, the students are not happy with everything else that's going on right now. And the challenging piece is that they're basically pushing that down to each campus, and then at our campus, they're now pushing that down to us to explain to the students why they will not be getting what they know is their Union WellLink fee refunded. And so I was curious if anyone else was in that situation and what kind of language that they were using to attempt to justify that to the students.
Hey, Kate, I was wondering, how is that aligned with continuing to pay your student employees? I can't remember what you wrote about paying students at the same time.
Yeah, we are paying all student employees. So at the Well, that's about 200 part-time staff, and combine that with our university union, which is another 100 part-time student staff until April 7th. And that was in conjunction with our HR. Technically, we're an auxiliary, but they did match what the stateside HR also provided. And so they kind of defined it as a 3-week equivalent notice. So they said that this is 3 weeks notice that students could apply for unemployment. And we do have the ability to continue to employ students if we have projects or essential duties that we need to assign them. And then they would still be eligible for unemployment in regards to a reduction of hours. So the mandatory campus fee is something that obviously covers debt service for our buildings. Obviously we have salaries and wages, and there is quite a few expenses that we will incur. So again, I was just kind of curious if anyone else was in that boat and had language that we could possibly share.
Anybody else have language for that they want to share or throw in the chat box? Because I will present the opposite too.
At
okay, if you have language.
Sorry, at UMB,
go ahead,
we have.
Hi, Gengshan. Go ahead.
Hi, we have developed FAQs. We put that on the website, which I will send a link to everyone. So we have a number of questions dealing with, how do we deal with the locker rentals, the parking passes, memberships, personal trainings, and all kinds of questions there. So this is the living document. We keep that updated on a regular basis because the situation evolves on the daily basis. So we have received some of the comments back from the Facebook, from social media, from our members, and very appreciative that we keep them engaged and let them know what is coming. We're all dealing with this unprecedented situation. No one knows what to do, and no one has any previous experience at all. But certainly that this is one of the ways that we're trying to maintain our communication with our members.
Great.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on Kate's what Kate is doing justifying the whole fee?
Well, Leah, we know many people are shifting to virtual delivery, right, of programs, right, as best they can. And I imagine that's a big justification for keeping your student fee. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. So at Oregon State, we actually got asked on Friday to propose a reduction in our student fee. So to our student fee committee, and then it will be presented to the Board of Trustees on April 4th. So we have like a less than a 2-week turnaround to make a determination of how much we could reduce our fee and continue and remain viable. So we actually are going through the process right now to determine whether or not how much we can drop. And the pressure is to actually go about 20% or more. We aren't getting clear direction from administration on what their expectation is. The students are trying to protect student wages and student jobs. So we are trying to come out strong with remote delivery, which we are. We'll deliver that starting with Monday when our term starts. And we're trying to show that how we can be able to, the word is pivot. And if you ask my staff, they'll put another, we're going to pivot the blank out of that because we need to, because when we come back in the fall, these students are going to have a different experience. So we're trying to justify keeping more of our fee to show that we are going to be prepared for a different student that comes back to campus that may expect a hybrid delivery, not just a blip in the radar right now to show that, oh, we can help you be well and be successful while you're working off campus, but how can we do this to continue that work and not just actually make it a substitute for one term? So we are working hard at that. We don't have an answer, but if we were have to drop, I mean, and everybody's budgets are different, but that 15% drop is probably going to result in FTE because we can't manage that just out of expenses. And so we're actually looking at how do we restructure programming. When we come back in the fall, do we need as much FTE around sport programs or adventure leadership or fitness that we currently have? Because if students go to all doing their fitness classes online, are they going to come back into a fitness class? So we're trying to make our best guess, judgment of what we might see in the future to actually manage a financial deficit that won't just be for the spring, but will probably impact us for the next year at least until we're able to rebuild that. So if others are in that situation, please throw that up in the chat box, because I think that will be a part of the conversation across the country related to student fees or whatever your source of fees are if they are getting reduced. So.
I guess I can just, to clarify for everyone, we are refunding all of our, what we call an optional fee for service program. So as most people have indicated, personal training, all of our non-student memberships, we also actually gave a partial refund for the month of March and have now put a freeze on all of those moving forward. So those programs, we did make that decision immediately. We would definitely refund. So it's really just that mandatory fee that is part of the student's tuition that they pay. So we're prepared to put something together, and once that is done, I can share with the group, because it sounds like we might be one of the first kind of making that ruling. And again, it was more coming from a place of the decision was made without us, so it really was out of our control. Leah, it sounds like you're able to have a lot more control in that decision. We really did not have any control, although it's positive financially for us. The burden now lies on us to justify that to the students.
Yeah, that does sound, yeah, it sounds just as difficult, Kate. Any other comments or thoughts that actually where you might be with fees and any strategies, or let's go to that strategy level as directors. What strategies are working with administration to actually positively, not have to take a reduction? Or have you even heard that yet?
This is John Lentz at Indiana State. And our university is being pretty specific about what we can and can't do for the most part at this stage of the game. Memberships, we are typically recommending to extend their memberships once we reopen. So it's strongly recommended at this stage that we not do refunds unless they're voluntary programming refunds.
I actually got a couple texts that can't be made public yet from two different professionals that they are in the same situation that I'm in. So they said, I don't think I can make that public yet.
Yeah.
My staff knows the percentage is announced on Friday. So yeah.
Well, if I don't see too much more, I'm wondering if we maybe, as you said, Leah, pivot in this discussion a little bit. I was Laura at Penn State, sort of thinking about, Laura inspired me to think about this. What are people doing or struggling with or thinking about how to engage with your full-time staff, and how are you going through trying to assign them work and tracking their work and making sure that you're feeling that you're getting something from them? And what is that like emotionally? I know one thing I didn't highlight at Stanford is Stanford also acknowledged that there's a lot of folks on our staff at Stanford that, they'll run out of things to do in a week, right? If you're somebody that if your job relies you to be with people, relies you to fix a building, relies you to clean something, and there's nothing to fix or nothing to clean, you're still going to get paid here. But I'm wondering if people would be willing to share some of the techniques they're using to support their professional staff and or sort of assign and track work. And at Stanford, I'll just start it. At Stanford, we've sort of decentralized it. We have people using some different platforms. Somebody in the chat had talked about using Basecamp. We have about 2 of our departments are using Asana. Others are using Google Spreadsheets. I've really tried to let each department area track what they're doing on their own. And then I'll be checking in with each department area to make sure that we're moving forward. And I've sort of felt my role is not to be driving them, right? But I think my role is to be supporting them through this instead of always demanding an output. There are some things that I think we need to get done. We need to make sure our virtual stuff is really good. So I'm pushing us there, but I'm also trying to support them emotionally and say, hey, we'll get through this. I trust you to do good work. I trust you to fill your time. And I need to make sure that you get outside and that your mental well-being is good. And if you have kids, feel free to alter your schedule to work with your kids, right? If that means you're going to share with us that you're going to work from 10 till 6 or something, that's fine. But we're trying to make sure that people are really communicating broadly, because everybody in their own homes has different living situations, and it's hard to get us all to be moving forward. So I'd love to hear what some other people are doing or how you're approaching managing your full-time staff.
Hey, Alex, this is Linda from College William & Mary.
Hi, Linda.
We're doing the same thing. I think us as recreation professionals have never allowed ourselves to stop and just learn, because we never have time to do that. So I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm encouraging our staff to do that. Yale right now is offering a free class called The Science of Well-Being. So anybody can go on and sign up for that. And I'm encouraging people that are in that area to do that. So we're trying to be lenient also. We are kind of a hub in Virginia of cases, unfortunately, and deaths. So all our school systems have closed, even K through 12. So people with kids, obviously that changed their lives yesterday. So just trying to be flexible, understanding. There's probably very few people on our staffs that have worked only a 40-hour week most weeks during the year. And if they work a 36 or 34-hour week now, I probably don't care. So each person's setting up a Google sheet of projects they want to do. And each week they just update me on where they are on the projects. And I trust that they're being honest, and I've trusted them with students' lives their whole time. So if I can do that, I can trust them to tell me they're working however many hours they're working, and being very liberal on annual leave. If they want to take it, take it. we've also set up emergency leave for people who have been asked to quarantine because they have been exposed, which unfortunately I have, so I have to be home. And for as long as we're still working, it doesn't matter. But if they can't work, they've got 80 hours of emergency leave that they can use only around the COVID-19. They have to either be exposed and have been told they have to quarantine, or somebody in their family has, but that's 80 hours they can use for that.
Alex, it's Laura from Penn State. We have used Microsoft Teams pretty extensively to set up framework just so that I can be informed, and we've messaged this carefully to staff that it's not so much, we trust them to continue to work hard as they always or typically do, but for me to be able to articulate to the leadership in student affairs, hey, here's what we're doing, I found to be very effective so that they can then articulate in our conversations with student leaders to be able to articulate really effectively and efficiently, this is what we're doing so that there is a return, a continued return on investment for that student fee. And so we are utilizing, thankfully, we engaged in Teams training through Nurse Opportunities within the last month. It's been incredibly timely. And that's been a really effective tool for efficient communication.
Hey, Alex, this is Rusty from University of Idaho and all. We're talking about managing the unmanageable. And some of the things, much like Laura, we put in place is we use Teams quite a bit and Zoom. I have daily Zoom check-ins at 11 a.m. every day. My leadership group, we get together and we do a Zoom check-in for about 30 minutes to kind of talk about the goings on and what's happening. And then I also require them still to do a weekly report. And they can give me, and it's about 5 questions. That way I can communicate with my leadership, kind of what's happening, what's going on. And because I can't be over their shoulder at home all the time watching what they're doing or how they're doing it, but I can hold them accountable to what they tell me they are doing and checking in and doing that. And so much like Laura as well, trust them very much to do the work, because right now, if we're not validating what we're doing or how we're doing it, that gives opportunity to rethink our workforce, rethink how we're currently operating in these tough budget times. And so, yeah, I mean, we got a very active and motivated group and trying to manage and keep up with all that's going on.
And this is Kevin from Rome University. I think a big thing about morale and emotional well-being for our professional staff, because our university is mandating that they do daily tasks and goals to justify the work being done and possibly relocating them to essential areas of the campus. So we're trying to show value of current operations, whether it's virtual learning and programming and events, as well as providing resources. And we actually did a WebEx. We use WebEx instead of Zoom, but we did a WebEx with all of our student employees. They're not being paid, but we're going to have regularly scheduled just check-ins and any questions, concerns, and they don't have to be campus recreation related, whether it's academic concerns or questions or other student affairs, questions regarding housing and moving out. So we just want to make sure that in our bi-weekly meetings, we're still having those via virtual and providing Google Slides now. And part of that's going to be about their own personal connections to people that have been impacted by the pandemic, whether they're nurses or doctors, or even just the lacking of stuff in grocery stores and how we can all practice the CDC guidelines. But you know, we're trying to show our value, and I'd like for our whole team to focus on Campus Rec. It's also really about what we can learn from this. How can we be more efficient? How can we use virtual learning? How can we accommodate accessibility virtually? So I think there's a lot of things that how can we be better after this, and I'm hoping we don't lose budgets and resources and staffing from this, but how we can still provide more value, because some of us are forced to learn virtual things, but I think it's a big value where our university is trying to be at the forefront of the esports movement, and I think this is a great way to use those platforms, not just for esports, but just for social connectivity and activities we can do via the esports platforms of Twitch now that
Thanks,
for that.
Kevin.
Go ahead, Pam.
No, I was just saying thanks to Kevin. The other question I have is does anyone willing to share how you're paying attention to your own mental health? I think you're all in unique roles where you're managing up, you're managing down, you're managing sideways. You're probably trying to help peers on campus. You know I'm trying to do the same for NERSA. So what are we doing to pay attention to our own mental health, stress levels, etc.?
Download the stress to your loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
Just kidding. It's extremely difficult time for everyone. We're not used to this working from home, and the whole family, the household is. I'm not saying chaotic because I don't have many kids around anymore, but the environment is different. Certainly, there's a tremendous amount of stress, and people feel, to some extent, that people feel that if you're working at office, that you get more work done. But you have set times that when you go to work and when you get off. But when you are working from home, you are constantly engaged on the team, Microsoft Teams, on the chats, and you are obliged to answer any of the questions at any moment. There is no set of time that is off work and on work time. So to some extent that you are even working longer hours from home than from the office. So that is also added some of the stress, I guess, to some extent that, as we are a director, I guess, a manager, that slightly easier. Some of the staff felt that, they have to keep their boss informed about what they're doing, and they're always on their tippy toes and make sure that they don't screw up things. And if I send an email to someone and they're going to respond it right away. If not, that they might be considering, well, geez, maybe my boss thinks that I'm not working, I'm doing some of my personal stuff there. So I think there's a tremendous amount of stress. As Kevin mentioned, we are, as the previous speaker said, that we need to trust our staff. We give them the task to do, and we don't need to check on every minute of them what they are doing. And as long as they get the work done, that's the main thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jing. Some of you know I've worked from home a couple days a week for over 10 years, and it is very different to work from home 5 days a week, week after week. But some of the things I would encourage you to do is, I know when I work from home, I miss my commute time because that's a transition from work to home. And when your work is in your home, then you don't get that transition time. And so I would encourage you to think about ways to get that transition time. Shut your computer down, but stay in your office before you go out with the family, or get that walk around the block. You do have to create some structure and breaks. And even though our phones have followed us home for many, many years, right, which was one layer of work always in our pocket, but there is some kind of tipping point about also having your laptop and the rest of your stuff at home with you. If you don't have the ability to, put your work area in a place with a door, if you need to use the dining room table or some other kind of shared space, I would pack it up and put it away on the weekends. And if that's unreasonable, I would get a bed sheet and put it over your computer and whatever else. It's really important for your mental health to take that break from work. What else have I learned over the years? It's difficult to do with kids at home, right? I started doing this when my kids were pretty young, and we had to establish some rules around that, around whether they could pop in and say hi or when they couldn't. I think they made me, they'll kill me. They made me little, do not come in signs, Mom, right, in their own little kid coloring years ago that we used for a while. There are some wonderful women in NERSA who are going to be hosting next week a virtual forum on working from home with kids, and they decided to do it during the chaos, right? So we can all just admit that there's a bit of chaos going on. So I'm glad to hear you're still exercising, you're getting outside. There's lots of great ideas in the chat here about trying to take those breaks from work to really create those boundaries.
Yeah, speaking of that, there's a Rusty Vineyard put this term in here, decision fatigue. And I'm just wondering how, speaking of well-being, how are people handling that, right? There's so many decisions to be made so quickly that how are people feeling about their ability to make decisions? Are there good ways that you're trying to get input on those decisions? Anybody else feeling that decision fatigue? Because I think it relates to, I think it was Mike Wise said that he turns everything off at 5 p.m. and that sort of tension between wanting to take care of ourselves, right, Pam? Like, yeah, I'm done. I put my day in, but as directors and leaders, we're still charged with leading these these areas. And how are people dealing with that decision fatigue? Are people feeling that same way?
Alex, this is Linda. I would add to that also, not only the fatigue, but every day it changes. And it's not the administration's fault because things are changing every day. You're open, you're closed, you're doing this, you're not doing this, you're giving refunds, you're not. It changes every day. So just trying to navigate not just the decisions, but that, hey, whatever I tell you today could very easily change tomorrow. We just all have to be flexible.
Yeah, and I would also add to both of you and at least in my case right now, a lot of my fatigue is the responding to immediate requests from AVPs and VPs at the end of what would be a normal workday. As they've gone through all their meetings, it's, hey, I need this at 3 o'clock, but I need it by 5 o'clock for a decision that they're going to make later. And I feel like that's really draining for me and my staff, especially as a new director who's been in my role for, I feel like 2 months now. I don't know all the information off the top of my head that I would if I would have been around for a few years to be able to know all that. So I don't have to involve my staff. So I have to balance basically my ask to my staff and fatiguing them over time too. So it's been a challenge for sure. And, you always think, oh, it's going to settle down because now we're closed for 2 weeks or now we're whatever. But to Linda, to your point, we get something else that's going on. Like the mayor of Birmingham just put a shelter in place for the city of Birmingham, which is interesting for us as a relatively large city. Most of us actually live outside of the city limits, but that obviously impacts our work. So it's been kind of a constant changing world, even though we already kind of know we're closed for the foreseeable future.
This is Ryan at San Francisco State University, and one thing I would just add to this conversation is, because it is challenging, we're all kind of dealing with trying to answer all these different questions coming from our staff and our students and higher administration. But I think there are times that we also just need to be really honest with people and just let them know that we don't know that answer right now, and that's okay. But we will do our best to try and get the answer as soon as we can. And just putting that out there up front for people to just remember that we're all kind of going through this together and still trying to figure things out.
Hi, this is Emily McElwain from CSU Pueblo. I think right now my favorite phrase is "at this time." Linda said it, everything is just changing, and so that we have to communicate the best we can with the information we have available and really underscore to our students, and we've got a lot of community members that, that's the decision at this time, and also point out that sometimes the decisions are made for us and we don't necessarily get to make that final decision. I know we were faced with that a week ago when, per order of the governor, we were required to close, which it was beyond the scope of our campus and our individual operations. And so just being able to clearly articulate where decisions are being made, I think helps members and students understand that the situation is not necessarily just resting with us as the leaders.
I'm watching Pam. I like Diane Yee's question. What's going to happen with the national t-shirt competition? That is great. And then somebody else talked about also the Zoom themes. I know my wife works in education also, and they're doing at least weekly Zoom meeting themes. And so somebody's having a Hawaiian theme for their Zoom meetings, so people can wear their Hawaiian shirts and trying to bring a little levity or at least community to what we're doing.
Yeah, I think sharing pictures of the slippers you wear at home or your house shoes is kind of a fun thing. At headquarters, we had started a noon plank challenge a couple weeks before we closed, so we're still doing that. We all get on either Zoom or in Microsoft Teams video and do our, I think we're up to 90-second planks now. There's a group of them that are at 180 seconds. That's not me, but that's been fun.
I'm wondering if there's something others are dying to talk about, please chime in. We haven't really talked too much about our leadership of facilities and spaces. And I'm wondering, looks like we've got about, this is for an hour, right, Pam? So we've got a few more minutes. And I'm wondering if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about what they're doing at the facilities. Ryan Fetzer at San Francisco State had posted way early in this that he's allowing, they're allowed, even though they're in shelter in place, they're opening their rec center a couple hours a day to help students who need to shower. We've heard some stuff around other campuses around the country, maybe having to start thinking about being a triage place. You know, right before the call, we were talking about how often in the Southeast, Midwest, a number of our campuses had to deal with hurricanes and tornadoes, and turning our rec centers into places of shelter. And I'm wondering if anybody else is beginning to think about that and planning for that outcome. We know we have one colleague, we think, in New Hampshire, who's having to start thinking about that. I thought maybe that could be something that we might want to just sort of wrap up here, because that might be coming to a lot of our campuses.
Alex, this is Greg Bates at the University of Vermont. And currently, as we speak, the National Guard is setting up our facility as a surge hospital, anticipating that if the hospitals get overwhelmed, that they'll have a space to deal with overflow. So that's happening in our gymnasium right now.
Is there anybody else that might be happening too? Or it seems like that is an area of expertise that we might really want to figure out how to share some information, because it's so unique. There's some really strong folks regionally, I think, that have done this, maybe multiple times. I see Wendy Windsor on my screen, and I think you're at Tulane, right, Wendy? Right, the folks at LSU, folks in Houston. I'm just wondering, that might be something to have some folks chime in on over time too.
Can I ask a question, Alex?
Who was that?
Kate Smith. I'm curious for Greg, and then as you mentioned, any of those other schools that have previously done it, what was the financial agreement, or was there a financial agreement in regards to damage or anything that occurred to the facility? And so I asked that question because, again, with the CSU, and I see I have some of my CSU colleagues on here, technically we're an auxiliary, we are not stateside, so any sort of property damage and anything that occurred we are not tied to the CSU, so we are on our own. So I am curious for those that opened up for Hurricane Katrina, and as you mentioned, Houston, what kind of damage is occurring, because it's bound to happen, and what kind of support or what recommendations would you have for us kind of going into that situation?
I mean, for
Jeff,
us
at Santa Barbara, we were a shelter for the Thomas Fire here in California, and sheltered a lot of people in our rec center for that. And we got reimbursed by FEMA and Red Cross for any damage that happened in our facilities. So my advice would be document. Just have a record of everything, take pictures of everything so that you can submit for a later reimbursement.
I know there were a couple other themes that played through that Pam was capturing. One was international students. I saw that pop up a couple times. So I know that we are planning to do future roundtables, and this one is planned again next week. So if you'd like to blow up the chat right now sorry, I feel like a gamer. You blow up my chat. If you would blow up the chat right now with things that you still would like to talk about next week, and we know you're going to come up with like more things in the next day or more too, but just throw some more things in the chat there. that you would like to see talked about. We're planning this next week. I'm going to guess with 200 people, over 200 people on this call. We're going to come back with one next week to have a conversation, to share ideas. You should have ability to save the chat function on your own local computer. I believe you should see a little file button down there at the bottom, so you can save all that good information, because as somebody had mentioned, it's a bit of information overload depending on where you are with what's happening on your campus. So we want to try to capture as much of that as possible, and you can capture that too. Also, my EA just said there's 3 dots you can click on, and that's where you'll find to save the chat, helping me with that. I also wanted to point out too that there are lots of other topics, so make sure you have your staff jumping into those and listening, contributing, getting ideas for your area. Pam, the website was on the front, right? Correct?
Yeah. Yeah, keep checking back on that NERSA.org/motion page. We have a lot of functional areas coming. As we confirm facilitators, we'll be adding more and more. And then of course, we'll take your suggestions. Some of these we will try and do with partners. Aaron had put in the chat, we're gonna do a facilities focused one with housing and unions, ACUHO-I and ACUI. We're putting together an outdoor recreation one that we'll also do with AOR. That should be in the next couple weeks. We are looking for facilitators to do one specific to either summer camps or summer programming. As you all, there's some good chat about that. Start to face decisions about your summer programming. And these topics will continue. So I think it'll be a nice blend of sort of functional area topics, but then also getting the directors together like this on a weekly basis for as long as you want to meet. There's one for associate directors on Friday, if you want to encourage your associate directors to sign up for that. And we'll just continue to offer these as long as they're needed. We are trying to curate content a little differently right now because we realize your working lives are different. So I saw some good chat. Someone's doing a book club around some of the Recreational Sports Journal articles and the EDI resource guide, which is available on the website. Through the NERSA Know, we'll try and do some good reminders around those kind of resources that lend themselves to remote work or book clubs or things like that. We are actively working on how to repackage what would have happened at the annual conference, right? So much of the roundtables that we have at the conference will shift to this format. We're working with some potential providers as well as a program committee around that core education content, the awards program, ways to connect with the vendors you typically connect with in the exhibit hall. So just keep watching as those things get finalized, they'll be rolled out. If you have ideas, I mean, we're brainstorming as fast as we can, but if you have ideas about what would be helpful from NERSA, especially in this remote work environment, especially in this, COVID-19 environment, feel free to email me directly and we'll see if we can get those into the mix.
And there's also a question in there about Canadian schools. I think there's a webinar coming up for Canadian schools as well too. So appreciate seeing Sandra and Allison and thanks Sean and Peter and whoever else I missed on here too. Thanks for jumping in and giving your voice to this as well. Okay, there is a small school one coming up. Check the website. The link is there. Great. Any closing thoughts, Alex? I throw it to you to close.
No, my closing thought is gratitude. Been doing this for, now I can say I've been doing it for a long time. And the willingness of all of you to share your ideas and to engage in good conversations and to help us all be our best is always, always inspiring to me. And I learn more from this than anything I've ever learned from any particular boss. So I'm really grateful for all of you for getting on here and sharing your ideas and listening, actively engaging and just being the awesome NERSA that you are. So thank you all for all of your time and energy and contributions.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. I think we're done. Have a great day, everybody.
Peace, love, and NERSA.
Yes.